Can you talk about Milan? Because that's something I feel, just from the sense of, firstly, was hugely important to you and a very special time, but also that showed enormous progress and development in a relatively short amount of time.
Well, the club had been in a mess for quite a while, really. It had not qualified for Europe for, I think, 7 years. It hadn't won the league for 11 years. It was taken over by a New York hedge fund when the Chinese owner of AC Milan was unable or unwilling to meet the debt service, the debt that he had used to buy the club. And so it was really in a crisis point. I remember in one of my first games, our entire hardcore fan base, we were losing 3-0 at home, and our entire hardcore fan base, what they call the Curva Sud, the ultras, walked out during the game. And we were playing with an empty 3 tiers of San Siro at the goal we were trying to score in. The club was losing about 150 million euros a year, and that was going to have to increase to up to 200 million, inevitably, because of the wage bill. They had gone on a big spending spree, and so we had a lot of players on big contracts, and obviously the team performance was still average. So there were a lot of challenges, I would say. Again, we didn't have a commercial sales department. It was really, to the extent we did, there tended to be local deals. So most of the sponsorship deals, 2/3 of the sponsorship deals were local Italian deals, only 1/3 international. And we had a stadium which is incredible and wonderful, and I love it as much as anybody else in the world, but really is very decrepit now. There are areas of the stadium that are even closed down due to safety concerns. There are, if you go to San Siro, make sure you go to the bathroom before you go to the stadium, especially if you're a woman. The disabled access is very poor. There are a lot of aspects of the stadium that are just outdated now. So, this was a set of facts I was presented with, and I arrived not speaking Italian, brought in by a New York hedge fund with great skepticism behind, what a hedge fund is going to be able to do with this Italian club. So it was not a good set of facts. Let's say that.
Did they set a list of goals and objectives for you and with you?
It wasn't, we really weren't, it wasn't so much very specific KPIs. I think what they had decided was they would go for a very chief executive centric model. So there are different ways they could have approached this. They inherited the club not because they had planned to, but because there was a default on the debt, and so suddenly they're in charge of AC Milan. There are a number of different approaches they could have taken. One would be to say, you know what, this thing is losing huge amounts of money. We don't want to be involved in football. We will batten down the hatches, cut everything to the bone, and sell it to the first bidder that comes along, and walk and get out. And to be honest, they probably could have done that, and they probably could have made some quick money that way. They decided they weren't going to do that. They decided what they would do is bring in a chief executive that they would basically give their trust to just turn this thing around. I came in with a lot of problems to address, but I had a really full support from the ownership group in having a look at the organization first of all, and then putting in place the organization we would need, and then delivering on that project. So that meant an entirely new senior management team, for example, moving almost all of the senior management team out and bringing in a new senior management team as a first step, then really analyzing what we were doing on the sporting front, but also on the commercial front, and making sure that those were both lifted to a modern standard. And then we had a lot of work to do on the sporting front in really reformatting the squad. Bear in mind, my time in Major League Soccer as deputy commissioner, I was in charge of really all the technical aspects of the league. So that would be the game, including signing all of the players for Major League Soccer. So my background before I went to Arsenal was actually more on the technical side than on the commercial side. I had some commercial functions there, but really it was more the technical side. So in a sense, I was the sporting director for Major League Soccer. Obviously at Arsenal, Arsene was the coach and the sporting director, the manager in the truest sense. Now at Milan, I'm going back to some of those sporting director kind of principles and functions and thinking about, okay, how can we manage these squad contracts? How are we going to be able to bring down the wage bill significantly? Because we cannot be losing 200 million a year. But at the same time, we needed to improve the performance. So this was the challenge. That was the challenge. And normally in football, those two things run in lockstep.
What did you do to do that so successfully then?
I think there were a lot of factors involved in that. So, first of all, we brought in a really brilliant top-class scout who specialized really in identifying young players and worked very well with analysts. And then we had an analytical department that we formed, which did a lot of player analysis, statistical analysis on players. And it's really that combination. If you can get that working well, you can do some great things. So we had a scout and an analytical department that worked really well in lockstep. Then we had to choose a sporting director. And I was really impressed with Paolo Maldini and his human qualities with the players. So I think there were a few things that Paolo brought to the project. One was obviously his charisma and his presence and so on, and credibility, if you like. But I think beyond that, although it was new to him, he hadn't done this job before, was the relationship he was able to create at Milanello between the players, especially these young players who needed, if you like, a father figure who could give them a sense of belief. And Paolo did a great job with that. And so, we began this process. It wasn't easy because that first year we were selling or letting even go for free some of our top players and certainly some of our most expensive players. And the fans were skeptical. I wasn't speaking Italian yet. Our owners were a hedge fund. The team was, not good. And we were telling them, we're going to sign some young players that you won't have heard of, but we believe they can be good.
Do you feel that pressure and intensity and heat in the boardroom when you are having the local press and the local media really criticizing you? We had Steve Pagliuca on, who owns Atlanta and the Boston Celtics, and he was like, you do feel it and you do hear it. Did you?
Of course you hear it. But I think one of the things that over time you learn, especially if you're in the business side like I am, over time you learn that you have to do what you believe in and tune that out. I say sometimes it's like being a pilot of an airplane, that you're in a very bad crosswind and you have to land this plane safely, and you have, the entire all of the passengers who have never flown a plane screaming at you, telling you what to do. You have to focus on what you think is right. And then you have to have the ability inside the organization to have people believe and pull them with you. And then you just have to do your best to tune out everything else. Because, in the end, it's not a criticism of people who are outside the club, but the reality is there is so much misinformation that so much of what they're basing what they think on is just not accurate. It's the people really inside the heart of the club that understand it and know the challenges and what's really going on and what you're trying to do. And it's those people you have to have believe. If they don't believe, then you can't. This is not a solo mission, right? You're doing this all together.